And the last person down on the end is Jean Childs. Jean Childs is going to tell us today about a family-owned business, a very early-owned family business, the Penguin Club. And then she's going to tell us about the Economic Opportunity Board. That's one of the entities in the Black community that really served all of Clark County, but that most of us don't know enough about. And she's going to tell us about that, and she's going to tell us specifically about her role in Head Start. So I'd like to welcome all of you. I am so glad you're spending the afternoon with us, and it will probably take all afternoon, so just relax. So we're going to get started. And we have two people who are missing. They will probably come in a little later. I will not stop to introduce them as they come in, but as I call on them, I will introduce those to you as well. So Ramon, how are you?
Oh, I'm fine, beautiful, and blessed like yourself.
Fantastic. I'm going to give you the mic.
Okay.
I talk a little louder. So first, I'm going to go around the table, and I'm going to have everybody just 2 minutes tell us just a tiny bit about their early lives, where they came from, if they didn't grow up here, and how they got to Las Vegas.
Well, I was born and raised in New York City, Sugar Hill, Harlem, USA, Harlemville, however you want to call it, but it is what it is, and it always shall be. I came to Las Vegas in 1978. I was in the military, Air Force, and I've been here ever since and enjoyed it. And it's my home for the majority of my adult life, but my roots and all that I learned and experienced to bring me forth to this point is from New York City.
And so why did you come to Las Vegas?
I was in the Air Force.
Okay, great.
I was protecting the nation.
Okay, wonderful. Wonderful. We are so fortunate. And would you pass? You have a mic on that table. Okay. Jackie Brantley. Jackie, could you tell us a little bit about how your family came here and just a little bit about growing up on the West Side?
Yes, Jackie Brantley. Born and raised in Las Vegas, the wonderful year of 1948. 40,000 people inhabited the Clark County area when I was born. My family migrated here from Mississippi, Hattiesburg, McLean, and all of the southern areas of Mississippi. I used to hear Gulfport, Hattiesburg, all of those little towns, and they moved from little areas to little areas trying to find work in the mill, the lumber mill. My mother, Susie Parker, and my grandfather, Henry Moody, and my uncle, Herman Moody, came out from Arizona to Las Vegas, and they moved out here in 1939. Subsequently, I used to hear all kinds of stories, and sometimes I think they had wide imaginations, large imaginations. That's probably where I get it from. But I used to hear all these stories. Sometimes I'd hear them said one way, the other times I would hear them said another way, and then of course my mother was very descriptive and imaginary, so she always had the last word because she had a memory like an elephant. So from the first day that they arrived here in Las Vegas, I understand that they slept in a car. The car broke down because they were on their way to Oregon. From what I understand, my grandfather left them in the car, the two kids. I think my mother was like 18, 19. She had just graduated from Alabama State. My uncle was still in high school. And my grandfather found a job that same night. And he was paid with, as we would call, as kids growing up, bow dollars. There were silver dollars. And he was able to get a little money, fix the car, but instead of them moving on to Oregon, the money was so good that we called him Papa. Papa decided to stay here. So the whole family, the whole Moody clan ended up here in Las Vegas for that reason. And as it were, that was 1939, and I came along in 1948. and I've been a resident of Las Vegas ever since. I love this town, and I still love this town. I'll probably be buried in this town. But all my brothers and sisters were born and raised here. And it's been a wonderful community to grow up in. I had a village. I grew up in a tightly knit, self-contained village. And although there was discrimination and all kinds of ugly things going on in America, we were brought up in an area where we were protected by our neighbors, our community residents. And we had a family that was a village family. So we were raised really in a Christian background, and they protected us from a lot of the things that were ugly things that were going on in America. It was a city within a city, but I'm happy for that upbringing, and I'm happy that they found their own way to teach us how to respect ourselves and to respect other people, and not think of yourself just as one entity, but as an entity within an entity, if I can explain that later.
Thank you so much. Senator Neal. Senator Neal, can you tell us about just a tiny bit about where you came from and when you arrived and why? Oh, okay, thank you.
Are you through?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Hello. I don't know where to start on this, but let me see. The question, I gather, is how did I get it?
Yes.
Okay.
2 minutes.
Well, well, that's kind of a long story, because I had family to come to this particular area back in the early 30s. And then my immediate family, like my mother and my brother, came here. My mother came here in the 40s, 47. And I had a brother to come out here in 54. But going back into my arrival, and of course, my uncle, who came out here in the 30s, he was running from the law. And so he wound up in Hawthorne, Nevada, instead of Las Vegas. And that he went to work up there. By the time that he got there, they were moving all of the ammunition from the West Coast to inside the country here. And Hawthorne was one of those places that they put the ammunition dump. And he went to work for the Navy, and he stayed there for 52 years. And I remember when I visited him in '73 for the first time to know him, he kept looking at me, thought I was there to arrest him. But my mother and father separated when I was 2, and I was essentially reared by a Yamasee family. Some of you might not know who Yamasee family is. That was probably the first Indian family, an Indian group in the country. And I stayed with that family, and my mother allowed me to stay with that family because I was born in 1935, and that was during the Depression, and she worked, and she went to work under the Roosevelt program, the WPA, and she made an arrangement with my brother and I to stay with this family. I stayed with the family until I was 18. I started that when I was 2, and 18, after I finished high school, I came out here. That was in 1954. My brother preceded me, and about 1950 or 51 thereabout, and my mother had came out here in 1947 looking for work, and that's what brought me out here. I didn't stay too long after I got here. I can recall she had sent my brother down to pick me up and bring me, my mother sent my brother down to pick me up and bring me here to Vegas, and I can recall coming over the hill there in Boulder City and looking down at this desolate place and nothing but white dust. I said, what the heck they are bringing me to, you know, leaving that green grass of Louisiana and the trees and all of that stuff, what I was accustomed to. And then I said, my brother told me, he said, look, he said, I know you want to go to college, but the Army have a program that can pay for your way. So I went down to the recruiting station when I was 18. I had a difficult time getting a job here at 18. So I was in 54, so I wound up going into the Air Force, which was the best decision I made. And stayed there and happened to get the last 2 years to be TDY at Indian Springs. I was with the ARDC command, and that helped me a lot in terms of what I needed to do, in terms of taking control of my own life. And that's one of the things that the military can do for you. It helps you make choices. And I was able to make choices, and after I got the GI Bill, I went to college at Southern University and spent 36 months there. That's what the GI Bill was, 4 years, straight 36 months. I went semesters, summers, and got out pretty early. Started in 59 and went all the way to 62 and got a degree in political science. And I came back here and started my work to run for office here. That was back in 64, and finally, after so many years, I made it. Yeah, this lady over here waved and said, okay, stop, you know. Yeah. But anyway, she wanted me to tell something about myself, so I just did. Okay.
So if you're happy, Gene, the same kind of question. I'd like to know when your family migrated to Las Vegas, where you grew up, and I'm going to have you start talking about that first family business. Okay, good.
My name is Jean Childs, and that is my name. After I got divorced, I took my maiden name back. One of the things is I consider myself an advocate for the rights of African Americans in America, but also for women. So I just had this philosophy that, you know, don't keep the person, you don't keep the name. So my name is Jean Childs. So some of you may know me, I don't know, way back as Jean Dunn. That was my married name. I don't think that. My family came here. I was born in Spokane, Washington. We moved to Los Angeles, and we lived in San Diego, Los Angeles, Orange, Santa Ana. I went to 15 different schools before I graduated from Rancho. My sister and brother and I, who all ended up being pretty well educated, if you look at the statistics, we weren't supposed to finish high school, much less go to college. So I always blamed that on my mother, who was a very, very smart woman. And her saying to us from the time we started to school was, she had no dumb children. And she wasn't kidding you guys, okay? So we knew that. So whatever the circumstances were, we were to make sure if we stayed in the school for 4 months or 4 years, that we were at the top of the grades. And she insisted on that. So in some ways, you get educated because you're willing to learn wherever you are. And so we just kept learning and learning and learning. So my father came over here first to work at the Moulin Rouge. But we didn't come with him then. And the Moulin Rouge closed. My father decided he really liked the desert. And so in 1963, the family moved so he could work at what they called the skillet room at the Desert Inn, which their claim to fame was they were going to have black service. My father was in the service industry. He was a waiter, bartender. He managed some places. So he came over to become part of that crew. And that was just a very interesting concept. But it was it was a concept in that time. So we moved here from San Diego. Now, I'm not saying that there wasn't prejudice all over the country, that we didn't face it all over the country, but not quite like Nevada from San Diego. So one of the things I always like to tell people, this was a culture shock for me and my family when we came over here, and we didn't know we could only live certain places. There were certain things we just didn't know till we got here, and we were committed to be here. So that's how we got here.
Can you tell me a little about that family business that your father started in England?
My father was part of the crew who worked with the NAACP to get the dissent decree. I think most of you all probably know what that is. And that was a suit that was brought against, I think, 7 hotels and the Culinary Union for hiring blacks in jobs other than maids and porters, and waiters, waitress.
17.
Huh?
17 hotels. 17.
Okay, so I wasn't sure the exact number. I was very young then. So what they did, though, systematically, was that some of the people who were on the on the group, they didn't hire them. They hired black people. They just didn't hire them. And not all of them, but some of them, because they were mad at them. So the family decided we still had to survive. We'd go into business. So we went out to other family members in California, wherever, and we got the seed money to start the Penguin Club. We first started it in the old Moulin Rouge, in one of their small showrooms. And then when we found out we couldn't get a gaming license, we moved down to North Las Vegas, off of Lake Mead and Las Vegas Boulevard North. And we had to get a liquor license for that site and a gaming license. So I was talking to Joe because he actually did help us. The politics of not getting a license when you weren't being African American and you weren't going to have your business on the west side was very difficult, because the cities had decided that unless you moved to the west side, they were not going to license you. I don't know if people know that black people had businesses in downtown Las Vegas, and the city council actually made that decision. And North Las Vegas also decided to do the same thing. So we had to do a lot of fighting and politicking and everything to get those licenses to go into business. We were in business for 16 years before we sold the business, and we sold it to an African American. So it stayed there for quite a while.
Wonderful. So, Ramon, oh, and by the way, you have a pad and pen in front of you.
Yes.
Just if you decide that you think of something that you know you want to talk about the next time, you can jot something down. So that's why we have that there. And also for a little test I'm going to give you later. Right. Okay, thank you. I'm just kidding. Ramon.
Yes.
You are the editor of the African American newspaper. I'd just like a tiny bit of history of that paper, whatever you know about that history, and tell us about the paper today and how the significance of that newspaper today.
Well, to the best of my knowledge of history that was passed down from the publication, the Las Vegas Voice was established back in the latter part of the 50s, like 1958. Some of the individuals that was involved were some of the first black physicians that were here in the state of Nevada, in the form of Dr. West, Dr. Millen, and I'm sure Joe can help me out with some of those other names that were involved in establishing the publication. And they found that there was a need. They were not originally from Nevada. They were from more of the Midwest, more established locations where African Americans had a voice in publications, and they sought the need to have something as such. Now, it's been told to me that there was another newspaper that was targeted toward blacks before The Voice, but I've not been able to really to get the background and information about it.
Las Vegas Enterprise.
Las Vegas Enterprise, thank you, sir. And I don't know who was involved in that publication.
Palmer, I forget his first name. His last name is Palmer.
Okay, and that's what I heard. I didn't know the name of it, but I know that somebody said, well, there was something else before The Voice. And I think it was in 1956, 57, I think that's when that publication was being brought out. During that time, from the latter part of the 50s through the early mid-60s, the same group owned the Las Vegas Voice, and then there started being some transition in the latter part of the 60s where it was not owned by African Americans anymore, but a Caucasian. And that took it through the time of early 1970s into the mid 70s, where it kind of jostled around and moved around. Mr. Connors, owner of the Seven Seas, he had acquired and owned the publication at one time. And the Browns, or rather the Strathers, were their legal names, but Mr. Brown, Mr. Ed Brown and his wife Betty Brown, they acquired the Las Vegas Sentinel. They started the Las Vegas Sentinel in the state, and they also had a couple of other publications within the state to target black news and information for those that were interested. Latter time, they finally acquired the name of The Voice because of the history and significance of that name from Mr. Connors, and that which became the Las Vegas Sentinel Voice in the early 1980s. And through the time of 1980 through 1996, the Browns owned the publication, and in 1996 I became owner of the publication, and so forth to this date. I am still the owner of Nevada's only weekly black publication.
Thank you, Ramon.
There's a question already, so now can we, you know, well, she didn't say that I also host a radio show, so I'm used to people popping in and wanting to know, and addressing them.
We're going to allow one question.
You mentioned there was a period when the paper was owned by Caucasians rather than members of the black community. So my question is, did the paper at that time still serve the black community?
Yes, it was still The Voice. It still was The Voice. So, but it was somebody. It was pretty much an individual that had ends into the black community, and it wasn't. I think one of the things that happened was the newspaper at a certain period of time was not coming out weekly. It would come out during the political season when it would be. See, Joe knows about that. They would find that opportunity to all of a sudden become the voice of the community, to drive the community for political gains.
So we have another guest who joined us a few seconds ago, LaVerne Ligon. We are going to stop and we are going to allow her to introduce herself, tell us where she came from, where she grew up, and why she came to Las Vegas. LaVerne was one of those dancers who danced in the first line of black dancers in a show that was a long-running show with a line of black dancers as part of the show. And she's going to explain how that worked. But she's going to tease you. This first time, she's only going to tell us where she came from and why she came to Las Vegas.
Good afternoon. I'm happy to be here to share my experience with you. I'm basically from the East Coast. I was born in Washington, D.C., where I studied classical dance and received my training. I migrated to New York and to California and ended up here in Las Vegas to dance at the MGM Hotel that was being constructed. That hotel is now Bally's, but at Flamingo and Las Vegas Boulevard. And at that time, Don Arden, who was the producer-director of Hallelujah Hollywood, decided that he would implement a line of African-American dancers, like dancers. And this was a female line. And this is basically how I started in Las Vegas. I became the dance captain there until the show changed to Jubilee. Jubilee is still running. And at that time, he decided to put this black line in, and we weren't integrated into the show. The line itself was integrated, but we always danced as a line together. So that's a long story, and I'll hand the mic over to Claytee.
Thank you so much. So we're going to continue with, let me see, 1955. Jean, when did you start working at the at EOB? In the 60s? Let me see, that was 70s. So let's skip to Joe, because we're going to try to keep this sort of in chronological order. The newspaper started in the late 50s. And so Ramon just told us about that and sort of the evolution of that newspaper. So I think the next, if we look at the evolution of this panel, when were you first elected to the Senate?
In 1972.
Okay, so we're all about the same time period. Sorry.
So that's not the first time that I ran for office. My first time I ran for office was 1964.
Oh, tell us about that, because we don't know about that time that you didn't get into office. So I'd like for you to tell us about that first campaign.
Okay,
that was like.
I certainly can tell you about that. After I graduated from college, I came back and having participated in voter registration and lawsuits and all of that in the South, I came here and with the idea that we could do something in terms of getting blacks elected to office. And the purpose was to have blacks to participate in the public policy arena. So I ran for the assembly at that time, I think in 1964, and they had a gentleman who owned some property that is now on Jackson Street. That's a barber shop where I think Dixon has a barber shop. His name was Jackson. And I talked to him and he told me, he said, look, he said, come on, go with me. I had filed for him, come on, go with me. He took me down to Wilkinson printing office. He said, look, print up Joe's 50 posters. And I said, okay. I said, here's what I want on the posters. I want my name and I want my picture. At that time, black candidates would not run with their pictures. Like white people didn't know who they were, so but I said, okay, I'll put my picture on the paper and just post it all over. And all of a sudden, the candidate at that time was a fellow by the name of Leo Johnson. I don't know whether or not you remember him. You know him. Yeah, you know him. I know you know him because he was the EOB. And Leo Johnson, they put him, he went out, he got posters just a little bit bigger than mine, same color and everything, and posted them beside mine because I lost the election, and of course he lost too. But my campaign was ran to create a public defender office and also law school for the state. At that time, the late Judge Marbury saw the ad because Greenspan allowed me to put an ad in the paper, the Las Vegas Sun, with this guy. He saw the ad for the public defender's office and he applied for a grant with the Ford Foundation to get the public defender and establish that. And the first person to head up that office was Richard Bryan, who went on to become Attorney General, with Assembly, Senator, Attorney General, then Governor, and then U.S. Senator. But he was the first to apply for that. And even though I didn't win, but I did get a portion of my platform, put into practice.
So we're talking about 1960s?
1964.
So Jean, about that time, you also had the EOB starting.
Yes.
In the mid-60s. So can you tell us what the EOB is? And can you tell us about Head Start at EOB?
Yes. In 1964, now you have to realize I just graduated from Rancho High School, but that's when the Economic Opportunity Board of Clark County was incorporated. The War on Poverty declared a lot of money to go into communities. The idea was that the community people who were being served would also have a say-so in what was going to happen with that money in their communities. So therefore, these nonprofit corporations were asked to be set up in communities. They had to have boards made up of political, professional, and community people. That is, the people who would be getting the services. And the Economic Opportunity Board became incorporated in the state of Nevada to begin receiving these monies into the community and that would provide services. And I think one of the first ones, and I'm not sure, somebody can correct me on this, was the Manpower Program, SEP, which helped develop a lot of the training programs for deep, concentrated employment program. Right, thank you. And they started a lot of the training programs that dealers and all those kinds of things that could put people on the strip making money that was a lot more than making money as maids and porters or barbacks. So they had a lot of these kinds of trainings. And I started with them in that education component that did a lot of that training when I got out of college. And we were going along, and then Head Start was one of the programs that was also started, and that one was started primarily with the impetus of President Johnson. That was one of his programs, and it was to educate 3 and 4-year-olds to go into schools with a Head Start. In other words, they would not be behind the other children in school. But they also had components to help the families. And to me, that was one of the highly important components. And EOB became the grantee, the agency to accept the money, and then begin delivering the services. The first organization to run Head Start was Operation Independence, headed by LaBertha Johnson. That organization didn't grow a lot. And when the Head Start program started growing and when the parent part came in so strong, the Economic Opportunity Board decided to operate it themselves. When I came in, I was still working in the Manpower program, helping people get their services and what have you so they could go on their jobs. And they asked me if I would be the Head Start director, which I thought was very interesting because I didn't know that much about the program, but these were new things to all of us anyway. So I began learning about the program. I told then Mr. J. David Hobart that yes, I would take that opportunity, and I'm so glad I did. I was the Head Start director for 26 years. When I started, yes, I was. I mean, I don't want to brag about it, but we became one of the best programs in the country. I mean, we got awards and everything. When I started, we had 114 children. Now, you have to understand, that seemed like a lot of children at the time. When I left, we had 1,800 children in the program, and we did operate county-wide. Everyone thought, a lot of people think that was a black program. It wasn't. We had all races of children. We had programs all the way from Henderson, West Side, East Side, wherever there were pockets of low-income families, we would establish Head Start. Yes, and we were all over, and we had 16 sites throughout the county that we operated out of. We had training programs to help our staff become our teachers, because in some cases people thought we just made parents teachers. No, we gave them the time and the money and the resources to get the degrees to be our preschool teachers, which we're very proud of. And so the Economic Opportunity Board ran senior daycare programs, senior centers. They were the first ones to run the handicap and senior transportation program. So this board of community people, of professionals and politicians ran these programs. At one time, we were worth $47 million.
Let's stop right there. I think that is wonderful. $47 million.
Yes, I'm sorry.
And that was federal money coming into Clark County.
Yes.
Okay.
But that program that you just talked about was very, very important. And I happened to serve was a long-time chairman on that and a long-time board member of that particular program.
He's talking about the whole EOB board.
Yes, the Economic Opportunity Board. I served on that and also served as chairman. And by the time that I left as chairman, we had over $60 million, in that particular program. And one of the things that we had to do was to fight to keep it, because we had people from all over, political folks that was getting jobs in there. Goodman's wife served in that program. We had one of the lieutenant governor's wives served in that program. Had jobs in there. And I can recall that when we got the program to create the jobs within the community, they had standards whereby the people in the community could not qualify. And I remember that Donna Clark and myself had to go to Carson City and appeal to the Personnel Commission in order to change those standards so we could hire people from the community to go out and get jobs for other folks. And we were able to do that. And Clark, who was, I think at that particular time, he was chairman, I was on the board, and I kind of backstopped for him and whispered in his ear when he was going wrong on something, and we got that changed. And we came back, and Cosby wanted to elect me chairman because they didn't elect me chairman at that time, let me stay on the board, because I was a little bit controversial at that time. The Black Panthers was very active in the community. I can recall, and Dee can recall, the one time we came in and locked the doors on us, and gave a big speech, and everybody didn't know what to do, so I just sit there and just listen to them, but I wasn't afraid of anybody coming from the community I came from. You weren't afraid of anything, you just listen to people talk. But that EOB was a strong program, and it helped to do a lot in this big community. And when we had all that money, and the money was controlled virtually by black folks, we went through, initially had a lady by the name of Elaine Walbrook, who actually started the program in 1964. She was Swedish. After she left, we had a guy by the name of Cottrell. Some of you probably know Cottrell. He used to head up the housing authority out here in Henderson in the county. And then after Cottrell, we had David Hogarth. He ran the program. And after David Hogarth, we had a guy by the name of Tyree, who came in. Tyree was one of the most successful people in the program because he came in as a master sergeant, retired as a master sergeant from the Air Force, had a lot of experience in terms of regulation, and he was the one that expanded us into getting a radio station, KSEP. KSEP is owned by the Economic Opportunity Board, and I can recall that because I was on the board at that time, and we set the program up, the radio program up, so nobody could sell it. So the only way you can get KSEP, you have to be a non-profit organization. So that's how come it's still there now, Ramon, and you being able to talk. Okay, I'll stop right now.
So that is wonderful history, and I really, really appreciate that. That's amazing.
Well, I got some more I tell you now that you wanted to tell. Okay.
Talking to the mic. You got the mic.
Jackie.
Somebody waved a hand out there and wanted to ask a question.
Jackie just had a quick burning question. You explained a little bit of it. To a new program like that, how did it come into the hands of black folks? I know you explained it was started out, but now in hindsight, I think
we wrote the proposal for it.
And these were poverty programs all over the country at the time. Okay. Yes, civil rights movement, all of that started those programs. Jackie, same time period, early 1970s. Someone mentioned the consent decree earlier. That consent decree opened jobs on the Las Vegas Strip to African Americans other than those jobs in the back of the house. So Jackie, tell me the job that you were able to go into because of that.
Right, and I have to give some respect to these people. I'm sorry,
Exactly.
I have to take you back a little bit because Jean was working with Operation Independence as well. And I started in that child care center. And some of the kids that I was in charge of, one of them was Kim Bailey. And I tell her all the time, I said, Kim, I was working there as an assistant, and there was this little baby that was just wailing because her mother dropped her off, and they had places where mothers could drop their children off. And so Anna and Bob dropped off Kimberly, and I think Johnny was in there too. Who's now an attorney, and Kim, well, she owns her own magazine and just a PR lady of the city. Anyway, Kim was only about 2.5, 3, and she walked over to the little wailing baby who was crying, and she said to her, baby, stop your crying. You're going to be okay. Your mommy is going to come back. Now, I said at that point, one day, this is going to be a PR woman. Because nobody could get this kid to stop crying. Needless to say, Miss Libertha Johnson, with her wisdom, she was probably one of the families that came here in the 30s as well. Her father was very, anyway, we'll do it that way, but she, the 40s, okay. Well, I know that they did not live on the west side. They owned property in Paradise Valley, and they had lots and lots and lots and lots of money. But as a result, she gave back so much to the community, and I was one of those kids that she allowed to work there. And then they picked the kids that made A's and B's in high school, and so I thank God that I made good grades. But going back to that and then bringing myself forward, they also brought in famous models from Ebony to teach some of the girls etiquette, and I remember doing that. Bernie Anderson was one of the Ebony models that came in and taught so many of us, we were 12, 13, 14 years old, how to sit, how to stand, how to present yourself, boom, boom, boom. All of these things played a major role in me getting my job at the Desert Inn back in 1974. You talk about the consent decree. A few ladies worked at the Desert Inn prior to myself. I was not the first African American person that was able to work because of these laws and because they wanted to make sure that African Americans were seen in a different light. I never took the back door to the Desert Inn because my cousin Charles was one of the first black waiters in the skillet room. And Charles Washington was my first cousin. And but he could whale those trays, and he practiced and he showed us how he could do it, and people were just amazed at how some of these African American waiters and waitresses were just phenomenal. Anyway, recognizing that, knowing that, when I walked through the front, well, I went to Summa Corporation with my resume. I said, I'm going to write this resume because I am determined. I'm going to go in there. I'm going to get this job. I don't know. Somebody's just going to have to give me a job. So I wrote it took me a week, and I wrote it with the objective. And so when I went to the personnel office, there was this lady looking at me, and I was dressed to kill, and she said, where'd you come from? So I told her, and I had worked prior to that at the Clark County School District in the personnel division. I went from the receptionist to the second highest paid executive secretary there, and I also worked with the integration program and school facilities, which build the schools. A lot of people don't know that about me, but there were a lot of it. There were 300,000 students, and I handled enrollment projections, and I also was able to work with the volunteer integration program and then the mandatory integration program, helping them to establish feeder school alignment zones from kindergarten to 12th grade. I could tell you what school your kid was going to go to in one house, because houses were broken up. First graders would go to one school, sixth graders would go to another school, high school students would go to another school. But needless to say, because I worked in the construction office of the school district, which was called School Facilities, and at that time, Kenny C. Gwynn was the associate superintendent. And then he later became the superintendent. But he happened to follow my career from there to the hotels, and working at the hotel was a short, it seemed like a long period of time that I was able to work in that capacity. I went into the personnel office. They called me a week after that, and they said, we want you to interview for this position at the Desert Inn as an assistant to the director of publicity and the director of entertainment. So when I went in for the interview, I had to really think about that, because I said, I know everybody's going to be over-prepared. There were 30 people in that waiting room, and I could sit there and I looked around at my competition. But I was scrubbed down, very little makeup, clean cut, wholesome, and the only African American. And when I went in there, they were both interviewing me, both the directors, and they were firing questions at me right and left. And so I said to them, one question I said, well, do you think that my color might have they might have a problem with me because of my skin color? And they were, whoa, they didn't expect that question. So they defended themselves because I knew about the consent decree. I knew about that. But anyway, they defended themselves and they said that they had other African-American women that had worked in that office. But I said fine and thanked them for the opportunity, and about an hour later I was at home and I got the telephone call from the corporate headquarters. And the person that called me was a friend of one of my former bosses at the school district. Friend of a friend. This town is big, but if you have a reputation and values, you work hard, people know you do. You know, I didn't just get that job because I was African American. I got that job because I had experience. When I went in there, I knew what I could do. So when I went in to start working as one of the assistants to the executives there, my poor little feet hit the ground running. But I had done a lot of research on the Desert Inn. I knew about Howard Hughes. I knew about a lot of things. And then I knew about public relations. So when I went in there, I started to just do all kinds of creative things that they had never thought someone from that community could do, like painting flowers blue and green to present to movie stars on screen and setting up feathers on marquees to introduce Wayne Newton. But these are some of the things that you have to do once you get any job. You keep your job because you earn it and you were creative enough to keep it. Not just because you're an African American. And when I left there, I was very proud that I had stayed there 3.5 years and worked with some of the top advertising agencies and met a whole lot of people that were in the entertainment industry. Needless to say, it was a remarkable career, and I sometimes right now when I'm doing things, I remember the 8 week before the show opened, and when the curtains come back, when those curtains are drawn back and you see that orchestra and the stars going on the stage, you know you had something to do with all of the preparing it for that show. So that should give you a little bit of insight as to what I experienced. And if you have any questions, I'd like to.
Let me just add to what you just said. And I know that the audience is probably wondering how did that decree came about. The decree came about because of the fact that I had worked in the South with Department of Justice and billing cases for voter registration. And I brought those contacts here with me to Nevada. And we started integrating the building trades union. Then we got down to the hotels. The Justice Department had never, up until that period, filed 2 cases within the same city. But because I was able to go out and develop the case with the hotels and then hand it over to them, they said, okay, we'll send a lawyer in to file. That's how the hotel decree came about. And what I did, we did something that I had done in the South. You see, in the voter registration in the South, mostly whites got the test. They used to give you the test. And some of you probably heard about those tests. Like counting the bubbles in the bar of soap and all of that stuff. See, I was there to experience a lot of that. And they gave the test to the whites, so what we would do, we'd take the maids that worked in those houses, talk to them and find out, their leans, how they lean towards these particular issues. Then we said, look for this test, bring it back, we copy it. Then we would train people how to take the test. In this particular case, what we did with the hotels was to bring those people in, and I went out to the hotels night after night, and we dealt with the people, the blacks who worked in the restrooms. Now, if you want to get information about the hotel, you deal with people who work in the restroom because they're going to hear everything. And so I recruited these people to give me information about what was going on in these various hotels. Now, they didn't find out about what was actually happening until Howard Hughes came into town with his cadre of former FBI agents. Then he picked up on what I was doing, And then they kind of cut it off. But we were able to filed those cases with the Department of Justice. They sent in their people to file it, and Judge Foley, the late Judge Foley, Roger Foley at that time, handled the case. And I had to get on his case because he was lax in terms of making a ruling. And I started hopping about, justice delayed, justice denied, and all of this stuff. And so finally, one of his brothers, George Foley, came to me and said, "Hey, better tell George, old John there to actually do something here because the black community is getting kind of mad with him over this." And it was me who was getting angry with him because he didn't act on time what I thought. But finally he did. And when he did rule, what they did was to create a 12% African American and across the board in all population. That's what the decree said. Now, what actually happened now, with Hughes coming to town, he had contact with Richard Nixon. When Richard Nixon got elected to the presidency, started in the early 70s, Richard Nixon then pushed a bill through Congress to take the authority from the Department of Justice, give it over to the Equal Rights Commission, who had thousands of cases, and they couldn't get to you if you filed a complaint in 10 years. And so that's what actually happened to it, and thank you. I just want to share that.
Good, thank you so much. Jackie was just talking about going to work mid-level management. At about the same time she did that, we also had the first line of black dancers in Las Vegas. And Ramon, I will come to you right after this.
I don't know about dancing.
After this. So I'd like for you to just tell us what it was like. You started at this hotel that wasn't even complete. You had to wear a hard hat to go to rehearsals. So tell me about that period and tell me about the Ligon.
Well, I came to Las Vegas with my son, who was less than a year old, 1973. The show opened, Hallelujah Hollywood opened at the MGM in 1974. When we came to town, the hotel definitely was not completed as far as construction. It was dirt on the floor. We had to wear hard hats through the hotel. They had not arranged a permanent area in which we could rehearse. So we went anywhere where there was a vacant area and large enough where we could rehearse. In fact, at one point they had to send us home because we had nowhere to rehearse, and we were on rehearsal salary, and we just sat there for about 3 weeks until they called us in again and they were ready. This was a new endeavor as far as hotel extravaganzas were concerned. They had never had integration into the show of this type. I know that there had been a couple of ladies who had been in shows, but basically they were more fair-skinned. You couldn't really detect that they were African American. In this show, Hallelujah Hollywood, when you came to our show, you knew who we were and what race we were. We were very excited. I need to go back to tell you that when I auditioned for MGM in Culver City at MGM Studios in California, they had approached me to go as a topless dancer. And I didn't want to do that. I was a classically trained ballet dancer from the East Coast. And, you know, my eyes were like, oh no, I cannot do this. And Don Arden informed me that I was living in the dark ages. And this was a different time and era. And I said, I know, but I'm sorry, this is not for me. And I went back home. And in about 3 weeks, I received a call from Don Arden himself and said he had had a change of heart and wanted me to come back, and I didn't have to go topless, and that he was going to put in a line of African American ladies, and this is where all of us met for another audition. And we met up again in Las Vegas at the MGM for rehearsal, and we're still close to this day. We were a family, and we were a pioneer group. And it wasn't easy at first. MGM had stagehands, technical people, wardrobe, and they were all basically non-blacks. And so this was a new experience. We're backstage when the show opens. You know, we had black dressers. At this time, we did have a couple of stagehands who also were the first to work as technical, in the technical area. And one is here today. His name is B.J. Thomas, and he was one of the people that I met, as well as Leonard Holt. And, you know, they went through the same thing. With their co-workers, they didn't really want the black stagehands being around the white dancers. And we had quick changes. I mean, even though we weren't topless, the black group, we still had quick changes, and they got an eyeful, you know, and the changes were so frequent that I know myself, I had to have my own dresser. And this particular dresser became my son's godson. And so we became, over a period of time, we became a very close-knit family, no matter who we were. There were times, you know, during the breaks after the show opened, we would, during the break, go to the coffee shop. And at that time, management wanted us to look the part. They wanted people to know who we were. We had to be careful how we dressed. You don't go through the casino with jeans on and things like that. And people recognized us. They wanted autographs. And so, in a sense, we were like marketing, advertisement for the show. And we had to carry ourselves in a certain way, respectable, would benefit ourselves as well as the show. Later on, our costumes were beautiful, by the way, and the choreography. The choreographer for the show, one of them was Winston DeWitt Hemsley, who's passed on, but he choreographed Jubilee. But I had met him when I lived in New York. I did Hello Dolly with Pearl Bailey and Cat Calloway. And he was a principal in the show. And when I came out to Vegas to do Hallelujah Hollywood, we met again. It was like old home week. I did want to mention that people like Bob Mackey, the costume designer, and Ray Aguian were very, very popular designers for many stars, like Cher, of course, everybody knows. And he was also one of the ones that wanted to see me when I was in Culver City and auditioned. He actually wanted to see my body. So I was skeptical. I lowered my blouse, took off the bra, and there they were, these men staring at me. I mean, I said, oh God, what would my mother cause me? And they were very pleased. I mean, I was pleased too, but I still said no. I said, no, I can't do this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So we're gonna end this portion of our discussion today with Ramon. Ramon, as the newspaper person on this panel, do you have questions that you would like to ask other people on the panel?
Sure. I guess I'll start off with Gene and asking what were some of the things that the Penguin Club offered back in the day that made it different for African Americans to want to go there versus going down to the Strip if they were allowed?
Well, we were a neighborhood bar, and what that offers is comfort. It also offers a situation where pretty soon you know all your customers. You're almost like a Cheers on the TV. You know all your customers, they know you, they were friends with each other. Our primary customer group was retired military. So a lot of the retired military would come in there. The name Penguin came from the point of view that we were not in a black neighborhood, and therefore we had a diverse group that came also. So if you felt comfortable and you wanted that diverse group and you didn't want the loud gambling and what have you, and you wanted familiar people around you, and it was family run, so they were familiar with all of us, then that was a nice place to go.
I guess on a little follow-up, were y'all being pushed out by Jerry's Nugget and Silver Nugget? Did they want to get rid of y'all?
No. As a matter of fact, even though we were so close to them, we were so different that, let me tell you a scenario that would happen. Let's say it's 10 o'clock in the morning. Some of them, our customers, particularly on a Friday or Saturday, had been hanging around till 10 o'clock in the morning. And so they would say, okay, we're going to go down to Jerry's Nugget and have breakfast, and then come back. So it was like, even if we didn't offer the food, it was the comradeship. And then we had a group that used to come down from the Palomino Club after they were finished dancers. And they then had an opportunity to have some drinks, play pool, gamble and everything, completely away from what they did as part of their profession. And they liked that too. It was comfortable. Again, we were family. So that's what we offered. We offered the comfort of the family.
Okay, Joe, next question for you.
For me?
For Senator Neal, would be early on during the civil rights battles, we were fighting for integration. Now, 50 years later, we're looking at immigration. How do you view the difference between the two?
There's been kind of a sea change because now you got a black president, so that's a difference there within itself. And when you think about the period of time when we were working to try to get voter registration in order to bring that about, that was not any blacks who was substantially elected to office at that particular early period of time. And that was one of the reasons when I came here in the late 60s, early 70s, to try to create a situation whereby blacks could be participating in public policy position by pushing for the reapportionment, of the legislature and creating districts whereby blacks could be elected. Because up until 1972, you only had one black person to be, well, two really. You had one judge, that was Reed. You had Woodrow Wilson, who was elected to the legislature, and he was elected mainly because Blackstock, who was running in 1966, wanted to get votes statewide, and he figured that if he got at least about 5 to 10% of the black vote, that he could get elected. And so he pushed for Woody to be on the ticket for the assembly. And at that time, we had 9 districts that you run countywide for the assembly. And the black community, Woody would come out of his Republican group And they would elect him and put him part of that 9, and we would push him over. He always was the bottom candidate out of the 9, and he got elected. And so I decided that, okay, maybe we should look towards creating districts, single seat districts, whereby you can maximize the strength of blacks in the electoral process. And that's what we went about doing. And of course, that process took place with me talking to Republicans. And then we finally got it on by me going to North Las Vegas and running against a substantial Democrat assemblyman by the name of Paul May. And I just campaigned in the black community, almost beat Paul May. If I had crossed the track into the white community, I could have beat him. And then Paul May said, well, look, you've been talking about this redistricting. What are you talking about? So at my office at that time, I was a compliance officer for Reynolds Electrical Engineering Company. So I went to the board and I drew out 1 senator, 2 assemblymen, hospital trustee we had at that particular time, school board representative, state board of education, county commissioner, and board of regents. And when he pushed that on, but I had another guy who was a Republican that was in the DOE family by the name of Frank Young, a Boston guy. And I went to him and I said, look, I said, you guys, you know, Republicans want to increase your numbers. Say, why don't you go for single seat districting? And he said, that's a good idea. It so happened that in a fortunate way, that Frank Young at that election, the Republicans took over the assembly and he became chairman of the election committee. And he pushed this through. And he called me up to take a look at it and I approved it. And so when the Senate approved it, it became law. And then later on that summer, the Democratic Party sued us. And I could not understand that, you know. And then I had to go out and find some Republicans, me being a Democrat, find Republicans to countersue the Democrats. And so we went for straight single seat districts and across the board for everybody in the assembly and the assembly. And knowing that the legislature had to support their law by creating a district for the black community and those districts that I just mentioned. And on December the 13th, 1972, the 3-judge panel ruled in favor of the legislature, which gave us the seats. Then I ran, there was 7-1, and 7-2 I ran for the Senate.
Jackie, being that the senator talked about somewhat of what was necessary in the need of you could be affiliated with one party and you had to do diligence with another party. You didn't mention that you did also work for higher government with the Republican candidate that appointed you to positions. How did you feel, or how were you accepted within the black community working so closely within an administration that was Republican?
That is an excellent question. Let me take you back. Kenny Gwynn used to be a Democrat, first of all. And when I worked with him in school facilities, and that was in the late 60s, they came to the conclusion that African Americans meant something. Every day that I went to work at the school district, I came from a background that had courage. My grandfather was a very short little man, but he had a lot of respect for other people. And he taught me as a little girl, Mr. So-and-so, Miss So-and-so. Although many of my ancestors didn't have an education. My mother was probably one of the first to receive her degree in a lot of the generations past. But it wasn't so much the education that I got as a child, it was the character building, it was the value building. And every day I walked that road from the time that I was through newspapers when I was 5 years old, helped my mother. But going back and forth, I always stood up for what I believed in. One time at the school district, a principal asked me and a few other African American ladies to be hostesses at the National Black Professional Principals Association. He brought donuts in. First of all, that was the worst thing he could do to me. Second thing, I said to him, he said, oh, well, you know, we want you guys just to answer questions and just be there so you could be available for in case somebody felt like they were not welcome in Las Vegas, that they could walk over to one of you young, beautiful ladies and say, hey, look, where's the so-and-so restaurant? Where's it? You know, and I was offended that way because, and I said, no, I don't want a donut. And so, you know, word would get around that way that, you know, I wasn't one of those people that you could just walk up to and say, okay, you're African American, here's an opportunity just because you're African American. I was never that person because they would try to take me out of a room when I was a little girl because I would ask too many questions. Well, if you want us all to take Castro, let me see you take it first. So that kind of led me through all of my jobs, and I remember sitting down talking to two directors saying to them, you know I don't have my college degree yet, but I'm going to UNLV. I could do this job with my eyes closed, although it's zoning and planning coordinator. I know I don't need an education to do that. And they laughed at me. Later on, they went to cabinet. They took the story to cabinet and said, Jackie Brantley came in here, crossed her pretty legs, and said to us, here's what I can do for this division, blah, blah, blah. They were laughing. They thought it was funny. But at that time, the new superintendent said to them, you know what? I don't think that's funny. Because when I first came here, I came here as a consultant. I didn't need an education, my college education, to do that job. She's right. So they stopped laughing. I mean, there was something, certainly, two people walking different paths, one white, one black, one male, one female, and there was something that we always had in common. And later on, after working for the university, the Department of Motor Vehicles, the Desert Inn, the Nucleus Associates, and you know my career, as well as many of you, but he appointed me to that position as Director of Communications because he wanted me to handle his email. He wanted me to handle an in-house publication for all state employees. Well, when I did the second one, the power structure came back and said, you know what? This costs too big because it looks too slick. They said, you know what? This looks too slick. We don't need to spend our money. Senator Neal may know about that. But it's too slick. We have so many employees, state employees. I mean, we don't really want to acknowledge spending all this money just for state employees when I think state employees deserve that kind of acknowledgement for what they do every day. And so, needless to say, there were so many other Republicans that had children that had already gone to college, that had maybe master's, PhDs. They wanted that job as Director of Communications. So instead of him saying to me, okay, Jack, you're going to have to do something different, he moved me in constituent services because I also had a background solving problems. And he didn't want anybody to mess with his email. He only wanted me to do that. And I did that for him. And then I did the 10 hottest issues of the day. He trusted me with that because I had a pulse on the community. And many times when we would have events, like he was invited to be a spokesperson for the combined chambers, the Urban Chamber, the Asian Chamber, and the Chamber of Commerce, and any other, the Hispanic Chamber. And so they wanted him to be the guest speaker. And so many of the chamber members came to me and asked me, could we please get the governor to come and speak, because they thought it would be comprehensive. And he said yes. And while we were there at that luncheon, it was great, one of the members of the community walked over to the governor and said, did you know Jackie was a good Democrat? And now he's a Republican, right? And he turned to that person and he said, you know what? Not only is she a good Democrat, I've seen what she has in her engine. If you lift the hood, I've looked at her engine, he said, and it's running well. I don't see any reason to change it. So I never had to change my party. I was a Democrat, and somewhere in this world, when Democrats and Republicans stop looking at each other with an R or a D on their forehead, maybe we can get something done in this country. And I think that he understood that about me, because I didn't intend to change my party because I worked for a Republican. And I kept him straight. Many times I would call him in the room and say, you know what, this is not something that you want to do, or this is something that I think you ought to take another look at. And he respected me because I was courageous enough to just stand on my own and tell him what I thought, you know. So as a result of that, I'm very proud that I was able to work for Governor Gwynn, because underneath all of that, he was really just a human being.
But Jackie was the butler. LaVerne, just recently, it shows the amazing change of Las Vegas, known one time as the Mississippi of the West, where there was a recent cast call for dances at Jubilee, where the director is now African American, which is an accomplishment through all the years. However, even though he has become the director, he was putting out a bigger, louder call because he could not find an adequate amount of African American dancers. What seems to be the problem with us having, we fought for opportunity, but at the same time we're not taking advantages of it?
I have asked myself the same question, and one of my goals when I retired from dancing at MGM Ballet's, I started Simbatown Development Center, and the reason I did that was to train local minorities in the community that would be prepared to step into that arena and realize that there were career options locally for us. It was a good endeavor, but it has never had the pace that is in other large cities, as in New York and Los Angeles, Philadelphia. I think our community still does not see that as a career for minorities. There are many minority dancers of color, and they still come from outside of our city. I am proud to say that we trained many that have gone on to professional careers, but their careers are usually outside of our city. In general, dancers in Las Vegas are not viewed with the respect that is offered other dancers throughout the world. I was trained in Washington, D.C. I danced in New York, and I was respected. You know, I knew my craft. But as far as training, we have some good instructors here. One of my very good friends is Victoria Dale, who is professor of dance at UNLV. We dance together. We're from the same hometown, and she's one that is highly respected in this city. But we just need more. The nation in general needs to see and respect our style of dance in Las Vegas. You know, There's classical dance, there's tap, modern, African, but our base here in Las Vegas that is known throughout the world is the Las Vegas Showgirl Step Touch. And people don't realize that our dancers are trained also, but this is what the style of dance that is presented in the Las Vegas area. It doesn't mean that we can't execute the technique that is danced in other parts of the world. And right now I have an exhibition at the West Las Vegas Arts Center that gives a history in pictures of our time on the Strip. I have produced a small DVD of interviews and a documentary that was done in 2012 that in hopes to educate individuals about our history and struggles. And something else I have to say, as far as, you know, when I first came and they asked me to go topless and I didn't do it, I have a different perspective on nude dancers. It's how you carry yourself that I see. One of the ladies in Hallelujah Hollywood was a very tall, blonde lady, Trisha Lee. And I watched the way she carried herself, and she could have nothing on but a G-string walking down the hall, but she had so much, everyone had so much respect for her. And it just changed my whole view. It's the individual person and how they present themselves. So I just want you to know that I do respect the nude part of performing on the Strip. If they asked me today and I had a different body, I might do it myself. But at this very moment, Vicki Dale, who's a professor at UNLV, is in Houston, Texas, where they're having a International Black Dance Conference at this very moment. And some of the students and dancers at the West Las Vegas Arts Center are there performing today, right now.
Was that your last question? No, thank you. Thank you so much. That was a great touch. Before we open it up to the audience to ask questions, and that's what we're about to do, you just heard the announcement from LaVerne that there is a display at the West Las Vegas Arts Center of that black dance line that she was in. Please go over and see it because it's going to close
The 25th of January.
25th, the last day. There's one other announcement that I'd like to make. On your chairs, you have this colorful flyer. We are launching at UNLV our African American website. We have been working on this project now for 2 years, and we want to launch it. We're having the inaugural click on Friday morning, the 24th, Friday afternoon, 1 o'clock, 24th. Pardon me?
I was saying, was that there and going?
Yes, yes it is. Yes, that's who it is. So that's from the Goins collection. So I want you to come out. If you can come, please call the telephone number or send us. Yes, you can go on the internet and RSVP or call that number and RSVP, but you are welcome to come out at 1 o'clock on the 24th and join us. You'll have a great time. And we're going to have people in the audience like these people here today who will be telling some stories. So I want you to come out and enjoy. What else? In your chair also, you have a survey. This program that you're witnessing today started last week. It is a 4 or 5 part program, 4 parts. And we want you to evaluate this program for us. So please complete that before you leave. And now I'm going to open the floor, and I'd like for you to ask any question that you might have to any person here on the panel. Yes.
I have a question. My name is Lillian Lindsay, and I'm new in the area. My daughter's been here like 15 years, and I'm very active politically in Northern California. I was president of an organization. We had 7 chapters of Black women organized for political action. I don't know if you ever heard of them or not, but we were the first women's organization dealing with politics. We were the cause that we sent Ron Dulles to Congress in 1968. And so since that time, we've been really actively involved in the political process. I want to say that I've been coming to Las Vegas area for many years. I have 8 brothers and sisters, and we all had timeshares. So we were coming for Thanksgiving, Christmas. It was a family thing to come. I've also, my family owns a bar, I would call it, in the Bay Area. And I would come up here with BayPAC, Black African American, you know what I'm talking about. I would come up here all the time. And I remember one of the first times I came, we went to, I don't know if it was Fitzgerald's or not, but we went to this restaurant. And I often wondered why this restaurant, which was very popular, I guess I could say, in the Black community.
7 Seas.
What?
It was 7 Seas.
7 Seas.
I don't remember that being a name. It was a Black woman that owned it.
You previously said Fitzgerald's.
I thought it was Fitzgerald's. I'm not sure.
That was a casino.
That was a casino. But before that, there was a lady that owned the restaurant. A Black woman that owned the restaurant. And it was very popular. And they used to say that a lot of the Black entertainers used to go to her restaurant.
What are we talking about?
What year? What year was it? What kind
This
of year?
was
The 80s? The 80s?
in the late 60s.
Oh.
Bob's
She's
Kitchen.
talking about Mom's Kitchen
Mom's
on
Kitchen.
Jackson Street.
Yeah.
I know we took a bus from Caesar
Yeah,
Palace.
that's Bob's Kitchen. We used to make movies out of that.
Huh?
They made movies out of that.
Yes. But my question is, I don't know why that business didn't grow like all the other businesses in the area, even Fitzgerald's. You know, is there something that the Black community is not doing to make things work for us economically? Because everybody comes here to do everything. But I don't see the Black community doing anything big for themselves.
Okay, so I really regret that John Edmond did not come today. John Edmond is one of the businessmen in our area. But does anyone want to speak to your family owned a restaurant at one time? And is there let me see, do we have any other entrepreneurs here? So would you like to speak to that just shortly?
Yes, we owned that business for 16 years. My father died. My twin brother and I took it over, but we really took it over to sell it. Things happen to families.
Right.
And so Dean now works as a counselor, and he works for the MGM grant. I was working for EOB at the time, but we sold it to a Black man. So that he carried on the business for a long time, then he sold it, and it's now belongs to a car dealership. So I think the things that happen, the businesses were sold, profits were made in the selling. It wasn't that they were bad businesses.
Right.
We didn't go out of business. But just things happened to us like they happen to anybody. And the family just was not there anymore to sustain or to operate the business.
I think when it comes to restaurants, though, when it comes to black restaurants, just like barbecue,
Yeah.
everybody makes their own best barbecue.
Oh,
So
yeah,
it's
I know.
it's hard to support a restaurant because everybody feels that they're the best cook, that they can do better than that restaurant can.
The area that you were speaking about, and which has been identified here by some of the panelists as Mom's Kitchen, was on Jackson Street. At one time, Jackson Street in the 40s and going in the 50s and early 60s was kind of like the little black mecca of the black community.
Yes.
And was that because the strip was segregated?
Yes,
You have to
right.
understand
I know, yeah,
that the strip did not become unsegregated until back 1961 when Dr. Macmillan, who was a dentist in town, threatened to have a sit-in on the strip. And so what he actually did was not to ask for jobs, but ask for public accommodation. And he regretted that, you see, because if he had asked for jobs, things would have been a little bit different.
Yeah.
But he asked for public accommodation, so when the strip opened up, the crowd then began to go out and participate on the strip. And that, again, lost some money, people had to shut down their businesses. And Jackson Street just went down from that.
And you see that in a lot of black neighborhoods across the country. Las Vegas's black neighborhood was probably smaller than most black neighborhoods. And there's other history that we should talk about as well. I'd like to share some other things with you about the beginning of the West Side community and all of that will also make sense with what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm a member of the Links, so I actually changed my
I'm
membership.
speaking from experience. I don't know what the moderator's speaking from, but I'm speaking from experience when I tell you what actually happened. I was there, saw it.
Yeah, to me it seems like we got pushed out of business. That's what it seems to outsiders that don't really know. You remind me of the lady that I met there years ago. I don't know if that was your mother, grandmother, or somebody, but you do remind me of her. But I asked that question because I'm really concerned about the.
Well, it's a good question.
Okay, and we're going
Let me just finish this. It's a good question because, as you probably heard, that the Moulin Rouge opened in 1955, and then it closed shortly after that. You see, because of the fact that after midnight, all of the entertainers, black entertainers who was appearing on the strip, would come over to the West Side and they would jam until 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning.
And there's a lot of more of that history that we can share with you, but we're going to move. But we're going to move on to allow someone else to participate. Are there any other questions? Yes.
So many questions now about they started. But one thing I wanted to ask LaVerne and what I wanted to make. I think in about a year or two, the Swiss Center is going to entertain an international black dance competition. Are they not? It seems like I read this.
Well, it was supposed to take place here, right now, as we speak. And I don't know, it fizzled out. I don't know exactly who was in charge, and then it was switched to take place in Houston, Texas. So I wasn't aware of what you're speaking of, but it would be a good thing because it probably, the Smith Center has the ability to really make that come about. It's a large endeavor. I have been to a couple of the conventions, conferences myself, and they're huge, and participants come from all over the nation, the world.
Well, one of the things too I wanted to say, when you talked about the dancers being respected and all that, as an outsider, I'm an outsider, not on campus or anything like that, but I've been here and I've seen it from the inside and the outside. And it seems to me that there's a battle between those of us who want to live in a respected, decent city, and the PR people who want to put it out there as Sin City, what happens here stays here, to get people to come here. And to tell you the truth, I think that's part of the reason that in some cases people have little respect for the same people that they have respect for in D.C. or Philadelphia, in Las Vegas. There's just a tape to it. And I'm sorry, that's just my personal opinion, I believe, that I've seen this over the years. And so I wanted to say that I think it was even when you guys were recruited, you were recruited in Los Angeles, right, to come here. Now, if you went someplace else and recruited people to come here now, when they hear Las Vegas, they, I just think there's a tape to it. I'm sorry, that's just my personal opinion. And then I just have one more thing I was going to say about Jackie when Ramon asked her about how some of her friends and all felt about her when she started working with the Republican governor. And I, as one of her longtime friends, I can answer that question because I'm a guy who was Democrat too. But anyway, when I heard she was going to work with Kenny Quinn, I couldn't really believe it. But the problem is, I have known Jackie so long and so well, I knew that if she was working for him, there was something worth her working for him for. And so I had a whole different opinion, and even later on, and even I think he's one of the good governors we've ever had in the state of the Republican. So those are the things I was thinking about as I went along. And
so did you want to comment on what do you want to comment on what she said about the dancers coming?
Yes.
Well, I think that Las Vegas will always have that facade of being Sin City, having the glamorous showgirls. I had to accept being called a showgirl because I didn't consider myself a showgirl. I felt too much training, and most of us who had auditioned and trained as I did, was like, because we knew showgirls as being mannequins. Showgirls didn't have to dance. They just had to put on costumes and walk and learn to carry their body properly and look beautiful. But we actually worked. We had dance technique. And at one point, Michael Peters, who was one of Michael Jackson's choreographers, came here, and that was one of the comments that he had made as other choreographers had. And they had to learn that they had good dancers here. But it's an image that's hard to get rid of. But I think in time, people will learn to respect the type of dancing that is performed here as part of the overall picture. We're also dancers. And I had spoken to Vicki Baltimore Dale about this, and she wanted to work with me to project this image to the world and for it to be a part of this Black dance conference.
Were you here during the time that Lito Perry was here and the father was here?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Next question. Okay, no other questions? So I'd like to say that I'd like to thank this library location for putting on this series of presentations. Okay, sure. Of course.
You heard that I served in the legislature for 32 years, and I promise some of you say, well, what did he do? Well, did you see those sprinkler systems up there?
Yes. Yeah.
That's part of my law that was introduced in 1981, SB 214, and it became the model legislation for the country and for the world. So when you go into a hotel, you see those sprinklers, and you say, dirty as this. Now, I want to make this caveat to you. The hotels were supposed to. They got revenue bonds to put these sprinklers in, so they made the whole country pay for it instead of themselves. That's what I wanted to say.
Is there any?
Save lives.
One second. Is there anyone else on the panel who would like to make a closing comment? Anyone? Okay, good. So Jean and then Jackie.
Yeah, just a couple of things that I'd like the group to know that I'm very proud of. I am a graduate of UNLV, and at my age, that's saying something. I have a 4-year degree from UNLV. I always say it looked like a junior high school when I was there, but fully accredited. So, I had my 3 children here, and 2 of my children are also graduates from UNLV. The other thing is, working as a nonprofit and starting with that war on poverty when I came out of college, I have never worked for except an African American in my life. From the first job till the job I retired. And to me, that's amazing. And so anyone who says that African Americans can't run organizations or we don't do well or any of those things, it's not true. I've worked all my life like that, and I'm very glad. And I also believe that in those situations, I have probably not had to deal with some things. And I'm thankful for that also.
And I'm glad that because I was your chairman.
Yes, you
I would just like to thank Claytee White because Claytee came to Las Vegas, and she called me back in the 90s. This was like 93, 94. And I was working at the Department of Motor Vehicles. I stopped cleaning up just my house just to talk to her for a few minutes. And, you know, about 2 hours later, I thought, man, am I the fortunate one? Because she understood. She understood that with all of the panelists that you see here today, I know this lady is from Oakland, and I'm just so happy that she asked that question, because I'm sure that Claytee probably had the same question. Why and how did a town as fabulous and with all the money of Las Vegas, how did this happen, and why do we seem to be operating in the past? But you know something? We're not. I hope that the people that you heard today, that you heard these wonderful panelists talking about their lives today, I know that you probably can think about that in the future, because this is only a thin layer of the number of lives that this lady, she's interviewed hundreds of people in this community, and we're just scratching the surface.
Yes.
You see. So I know that across the country, this is 2014. Well, as we are breathing, we have a community in North Carolina and South Carolina where they're not going to be able to vote. Yeah. We're going backwards into to the Reconstruction. But to have people that won't be able to vote in some of the other places in the 5 or 6 states surrounding the North Carolina, South Carolina, West Virginia area, Georgia, that question should be a national question. It shouldn't just be one for here, because we are simply sisters and brothers of the dust, and we are all faced with the same thing. And we must start to stop being apathetic and do something about it. Whether we're in Oakland, Las Vegas, it doesn't matter where we are anymore, because we're all suffering from the same thing. Their power structure is trying to take us backward, and the Civil War proved something. It proved that Germany and France did not want to side with the South, so the South lost. And as a result of that, we're still one nation. And we're going to continue to be one nation. So I just wanted to put that in there.
Now, can I get a shout out? Can I do this hip hop television style? And I want to make sure that y'all all get a copy of Las Vegas Central Voice, the only black weekly newspaper in the state of Nevada. If you want more conversation and education to help you and guide you along the way, then tune in on Fridays to Black Power Talk Action Radio on 88.1 from 9 to 9:30. And you 3 little ladies in the back, are y'all here because y'all from school? Y'all had to do this for a class or participation? Both. Okay. Well, welcome aboard, and hopefully you learn something. Take it home to you.
You used to have your newspapers here in the library, and
What happened was that this library made a change, and they had closed for a while, And we used to have other distribution points up here, Kathy's, the cleaners. We used to have 3 or 4 places that we used to distribute in this area. So now we no longer have no other location up here to distribute. So to make that track all the way for this one location makes it difficult to drop the papers off. And that's something that we're faced with. And there's still many places that when they see the publication, they say, why do I need this here? And it's like, well, if you read it, you'll understand why.
What is the closest place?
There's a church there. I think the closest place is one of the churches. I'll get the direct. I'll get you. No places in Henderson right now. No.
So I have the best job in the universe.
At the university.
I have the best job in the universe. It allows me to meet people like this, to interview them, to sit with them, and to learn at their feet. So this is why I love what I do. So I'd like to thank this library for having us in today to talk about African American history as we enter what is known as Black History Month. So we're going to close now. I'd like to thank you for coming. This has been wonderful.